Right now, joining us is 63rd State Representative Matt Hall. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, Tim.
It's nice to see you again. I know that you've been really busy this summer. I know also your district kind of is pretty widespread, a lot of rural areas, and I see you've been visiting places like Vicksburg and Eckford Community Church and the Village of Burlington. You've been getting around everywhere.
I have, yeah, I think I have 21 townships, and then there are a couple cities in there too. And, in Vicksburg, they lowered their millage rate. And who
Really?
does that? Yeah, nobody does
Ah,
that. So they had a big community celebration. I had to be there because, I support lower taxes, and I think it's great. I understand, sometimes they need more money for services, but in this case, they found a way to live within their means and find efficiencies. They actually return money to the taxpayers. So I was impressed. That's why I went down there. And, we've had a number of great community celebrations. And I've been happy to present tributes at those. And, later today I'll be touring the municipal plant here in Marshall, the electric plant. And
ah,
I'm going to present a tribute to Belcher Auctions on their 100-year anniversary. That's pretty good.
100 years in business.
That's
Yeah.
pretty good. Yeah. So we're proud of them. I'll be there, and then I'm going to go check out the Kalamazoo River today. I'm hoping that the fog lifts. I'm going to go check on the work Enbridge has been doing there to clean up. I think it's important to hold them accountable, monitor the work they're doing.
So do you do that in a kayak or?
Yeah, we are. Yeah, they gave me the option of the kayak or the speedboat, and I think we're going to go with the kayak. Yeah.
Wow. So you are in your job as 63rd State Representative will be kayaking later, and it's truly part of the job.
It is, yeah. But I think it's important. I know it was a terrible thing that happened a number of years ago, and Enbridge continues to be in the news, and it's
Mhm.
important to, just so they know that our local officials, myself and Dr. Bison, are paying attention to that cleanup effort and the work that they're doing to make sure that they're fulfilling their commitment to the people of Marshall of cleaning up the river.
Get over to any of the county fairs.
I did, yeah, yeah. So, we have the Kalamazoo County Fair, which was 2 weeks ago, and then the Calhoun County Fair last week. And I like to go. I checked out the monster trucks, and I also was there to just talk to the people I represent and listen to them and answer their questions. It's a great place to go just to run into a lot of people. So
When
you
you
know,
talk to a lot of people, have you found one yet that likes a 45 cent per gallon gas tax? Probably found a lot of them over there that really wanted that.
no, I haven't. And I especially haven't found one that wants that and wants to support the governor's plan to send all that money to Detroit and not allow us to get our fair share here in Calhoun and Kalamazoo counties.
So what is going to happen? I mean, there's I noticed that pretty much any school union official that might be in a news broadcast says the exact same thing that the governor sent them to say, which is, to paraphrase, is these lawmakers just don't care because they're lazing about in lounge chairs all summer long while we're going to have a budget problem come the end of September.
Right. Well, I will say this. First of all, you've got the governor's proposal, you've got the Senate who passed a bill, and the House who passed a bill. So if you're a school, you just take the one of those that gives you the least funding and you use that to plan, right? And then everything from there is upside. But I will say this, in our district, every single school gets an increase, and it's the record that we've spent on schools. And so, with the Republican plans, we're catching up to those rich school districts. Under the Democrat plans, they keep that wide gap. And I don't believe we should pay. You should get more money because of where you live. Every school student should receive the same amount of funding from the state. And so I fought for that. The Republicans have fought for that, and you see that in our budget. And like I said, it's the most we've ever spent on education in the Republican budget. So, um, you
Well,
know,
there seems to be a worry that if you find a mechanism to divert the 6% sales tax on gas to put it all to roads, that it's just going to come out of schools.
Well, the budget we passed before we broke in the House, it put $850 million more dollars into roads. And it did that through cuts in the budget. And those cuts did not come from education. They came largely from IT, which, by the way, a report just came out that they overspend even what we used to give them. And then, I chair oversight. And we just found out one of these big computer systems, IT systems, federal court told them it's a waste and they need to start over. They spent $325 million on this. So we cut every IT program 25% and said, come back and justify the money you're spending. We decided that, these departments need to put money into this. And so we cut each department 3%, except for education, higher ed, and local government. So we fully, like I said, we increase funding to schools, and it's the most we've ever spent. It's the departments of government where we cut, and those, it's not easy to do, but it's a lot better than going to the people of Michigan and asking for 45-cent gas tax increase.
Not as far as the legislative session goes, it was due to go back after Labor Day, and there are people saying, "Well, let's get a head start." Are you going to be going back sooner?
Yeah, I believe we'll be back in session next week. I'm hopeful then we'll have maybe the framework of an agreement, at least between the House and the Senate, on a budget. I shared a little bit earlier about the House budget. The Senate had some other ideas, and so over the last few weeks, the leadership has been negotiating. So I think when we get back next week, we'll have a deal on these budgets. We'll probably vote on those budgets next week and send them to the governor, and we'll see what she does.
The governor then has a choice of either signing or vetoing.
Right, and I think she should sign what we send her out. Because we need to do this by September 30th, and I think as long as we put a good faith effort. Like I said, in the House budget, we put $850 million more into roads. It's the most we've ever spent on roads by far. I think it's a pretty good chunk, and hopefully, whatever we come up with is in that range or more, and hopefully she'll be supportive of that.
State Representative Matt Hall is with us, and House Oversight Committee. Tell us what that does.
Yeah, so I was fortunate to be selected to chair the House Oversight Committee in my freshman term. It's very rare. And the purpose of this committee is to hold departments of government accountable and to make sure that they operate effectively and efficiently for the people of Michigan. And so that's what I do. The two key areas we've been working on recently. Number one is Child Protective Services. They failed an audit. It said they really are not performing very well. And then the Grand Rapids Veterans Home has continued to have some problems. And so I've brought both of them in before my committee multiple times, and we're trying to get to the bottom of those issues so that we get effective and accountable government for the people of Michigan.
What are the issues at the Grand Rapids Veterans Home?
Well, there's been a long history of this. There was basically fraud and lack of patient care going on, and people got criminal charges. Now there's some very questionable accounting practices that have been going on. Basically, they're commingling funds where they weren't supposed to, and if a veteran needed to get his money out of that veteran's home, I'm not sure they'd be able to pay him back. The second is that there were prescriptions that were not being administered timely, and the department couldn't account for that. They said, well, yeah, everything's been done, but then they'd also acknowledge, well, yeah, these guys didn't request the refills they wanted. And so we're trying to figure out, okay, how can they both be getting all their medicine and they're not requesting the refills? If you're not requesting the refills, that seems to indicate you're not taking the medicine timely. They couldn't explain that. So I went and requested another audit because I want to keep the pressure on. I want to keep holding them accountable. So we got one back. We're requesting another. This is the best way for us to investigate what's going on when you bring in the professional state auditors to come in and really investigate. So I want to keep this the feet to the fire on this because our veterans have served our country. And they need our protection now. They need our help as their government leaders to make sure that they're treated well at these veterans homes, and that's why I'll continue to hold the Grand Rapids Veterans Home accountable to the people of Michigan.
What about our own VA medical center here in your district? I usually hear really good things. I hear it's very rare. I mean, a place like that, you're going to hear a few negatives. But what do you hear? Has that come up at all in your hearings?
No, we hear generally good things. I mean, those are all federally funded. And then on top of that, there's two current state-funded homes, one in Grand Rapids, one in UP, and then building a new one in Macomb County in southeast Michigan. So as a state legislator, our jurisdiction is mostly in the state veterans homes.
Sure, yeah. Also, you mentioned the Child Protective Services. What's going on with that?
Well, this was one of the most egregious audits that's come by in many years. Basically, last year, there were 40 instances where government failed seriously the people of Michigan, and half of those were in Child Protective Services. And so I've dedicated a lot of time to this, and I do find the public doesn't really think very highly of this department. They seem to have had a long history of problems. But what I'm working on is, some very things that would make sense to you and I this department wasn't doing. For one, they'd get a complaint, and they had a departmental policy. When they get a complaint of serious abuse and neglect, they would feel that could be fulfilled by doing an internet search or looking at some case file. And what really they need to be doing is they need to be checking on the safety of the children. And so I put forward a bill to require them to check on the safety of the children within the first 24 hours. That seems like it's intuitive, but in government, I guess it's not, because they're just fighting about that. They don't think they should have to do that, which I find ridiculous. We're also working to make sure that everyone who commits abuse and neglect goes on the central registry. If they're not on the central registry, then they could become a daycare worker or a foster parent or things like this. And there's some instances where that's slipping through the cracks, so we're cleaning that up, and that was leading to some of the problems for the department. We're making sure that they report the information to us every quarter on the improvements they're making, instead of what they're doing now, which is waiting for an audit, which takes years. They've had such a history of problems that we want to pass a new law to make them every quarter report to us, so we can make sure they're making progress here. Because, if we're not, these are our most vulnerable children, and people's sons and daughters here in Calhoun and Kalamazoo counties and throughout the state. So we got to make sure they're safe. And I've done visited CPS here in Kalamazoo County. I also went over to Wayne County over the break, and I visited with them, and I talked to the workers there, because they have a big problem. They're not able to retain workers. We're funding them just fine.
It's not an easy job.
No, it's not. But they're having a hard time keeping people. So we're trying to figure out why that is. One of the things is there's not, the workers don't feel safe. So we're working with the department on doing more to help them feel safe while they're at work.
I asked your counterpart, freshman state rep Jim Hosma, this, and so I thought I'd ask you too. You've been on the job now 8 months, I guess. Is it anything different? Is it what you expected? What is different? And how do you like the gig?
Well, I'd say this. The time really goes by fast. We have 3 session days a week. As you know, we've been off during the summer. So there really is a premium on time when you're there. I mean, another bill I'm working on is on this Child Protective Services. If they conduct an investigation, or well, let's say it this way: if a child is in contact with Child Protective Services and the child dies, there's another person called the Child Ombudsman, independent officer, who does the investigations. Well, those are confidential. The public can't see them. So basically, let's say that child was working with CPS. CPS did something they weren't supposed to do, like a complaint came in, they ignored it, or they did some kind of neglect. The child ombudsman finds out. There's no way for the public to know. Well, in that case, how do we hold them accountable? So I'm working on bringing that to the light so that the public can see what's going on with these child deaths in our state. But, something like that, you introduce a bill and then you go on break and then people forget about it. So it is, you gotta, you gotta constantly remind the others what you're working on. And it's, like I said, something like that makes sense. We'll probably get it through the House, but because time's at such a premium, it might not. It might take longer, even though, and that's why you have a lot of these policies, because there's such limited time that a lot of these good bills just kind of fall to the side when you're working on things like the budget and auto insurance reform. But I'm hoping to be a legislator that does really work on these good government issues that hold the government accountable to the people of Michigan. And that's what I do as chair of the oversight committee, and that's what you're seeing with the bills that I've been introducing and working on.
Anything else that's on your agenda in this coming legislative session? I mean, obviously the big thing is let's get a state budget together, and one that includes some work on our roads. What are some other big issues other than what you've already talked about?
Well, we'll be, when we get back, one thing that'll be on the agenda in my committee is campus free speech. We've had a number of hearings on this issue. We're ready to vote. We have the votes in my committee. I think it's ridiculous that so many of these college campuses, conservative speech is silenced. There's, as a student at Western, I dealt with this. It's been going on a long time. And so we're going to pass a bill to make it more clear that there's a right to speech regardless of viewpoint on campus. It seems like this is very clear in the First Amendment, but unfortunately we have to make it more clear that the First Amendment of the federal Constitution applies to the state of Michigan.
Well, when you think about, we've got the 50th anniversary of Woodstock and the moon landing, so there's been a lot of focus on the 60s this summer. And part of that are protests, anti-war protests, a lot of left-wing demonstrations at our colleges and universities. You would think that they would respect that as free speech, but sometimes it seems like free speech is only valued if you agree with it.
Absolutely, that's what we see. And unfortunately, on our college campuses, there's not a lot of diversity of viewpoint amongst the faculty and administration. And we see that all over the state. We see that in lawsuits against universities here.
Right.
It's never examples of filtering out and limiting liberal speech anymore. It seems to only be conservative speech, and that's why we need to make that more clear in the law, and we're going to do that in the Oversight Committee after a couple weeks of hearings that we've held over the last couple months.
Sure, and sometimes free speech hurts, sometimes it is people that have views that are just abhorrent to us, like, for instance, racist Nazi groups and stuff like that. But if like I was taught by my very liberal left-wing teachers in high school and college that we must endure that because our free speech is valued above all else. And I agree with you. It seems like they're losing sight of that now.
Yeah, I mean, the question is who determines what's racist, right? I mean, we all agree that the Nazi speech and things like that is apparent and racist. But, what I think's racist might not be what the liberal professors think is racist. And if I get to decide what they get to say, they probably wouldn't agree with it. So, I mean, it's all, I mean, when it's government or universities deciding what's legitimate speech and what's not legitimate speech, That isn't a very good standard. It's better to allow the marketplace of ideas to occur on a college campus, and then, the people with radical racist views, they're going to be held accountable by other members of the public. But on the alternative, you can really learn a lot at a university when you're able to hear both sides, and then people, we won't have these problems where people don't know what's going on in government because they'll have learned a lot more about the democratic process.
The thing that has occurred to me over the last several months is that I guess students at universities seem to not realize that they have every right to ignore protesters that they think are terrible and shouldn't be there. And you know what? If they did, they'd just go away. But then they come up and they want to raise a big stink with counter protests and everything else, and it just gives more voice to the people that they don't think should have a voice. The free market should kind of apply here. If nobody pays any attention to them, they'll just fade away. So anyway, interesting. We'll be interested to see how that bill develops and whether it gets any support. Matt Hall, thanks for joining us this morning on the show.
Thank you, Tim.